The Waking Land Trilogy is a high fantasy series by author Callie Bates. It's one that I started last year and finished off earlier this year, and I've been wanting to review it for a while on the channel, so that's what this is. This is the review on the channel. Here it is, here we go. So we've got 3 books. Each book follows a different POV character. In the first one we meet Ilana Valtai, who is also known as the Cavadiar. In the second book we follow Johan Korakaides, also known as the Karakos. And in the third book we follow Sophie Dunbarron, also known as Sophie Dunbarron. Sophie doesn't have a nickname. And I have to say, my overall opinion of the series is quite positive, so this is going to be a very positive review. Why is my opinion of these books so positive? Well, let me tell you. Come a little closer, let me tell you. I'm going to tell you. That's what the point of a review is. One of the more unique aspects of this book is just the writing style in general. These books are all written in first-person present tense, which is a really interesting way to go about a fantasy book. Like, usually the kind of books I read are third-person past tense, but these, instead of, you know, Logan walked down the stairs, Bayaz was making eggs, it's I walk down the stairs, Johan is making eggs. That situation doesn't happen in either in this series or the first law, but you get the point I'm trying to make. It's definitely an interesting choice on Callie Bates' part, but it works really well for the story that is told within these books. I've read other present tense books that have not nailed it anywhere close to how well it works in this. Especially because it's first person as well, it really puts you like in the head of the POV character that you are following throughout the book, and the present tense nature of it all makes it feel like it is happening right now, so to speak, and it is happening to you. Works really well to like put you in the shoes of the protagonist, let you feel like exactly what they're feeling at the time they're feeling it, and like get you engaged in the action that's going on. So the present tense writing style is executed really well and really does work in this series. Another thing I liked about this series is the magic system. This is a soft magic series, which was nice to read because a lot of modern fantasy tends towards harder magic systems that have got sort of rules and regulations, but I enjoyed like the sort of whimsical, ethereal, unknowable kind of magic. And like, especially in this, magic feels like it's coming from the world itself. People in the world have the ability to use it, but it is a very natural force, as opposed to like, you know, a list of spells or criterion. And especially in the first book, we get a very sort of atmospheric sense of the magic and the way it works. It's a very cool atmosphere and a really interesting exploration of magic. The basic plot, or one of the basic plot lines with Ilana is, so there's 2 opposing nations, Erin and Kairos, and Erin, they don't like magic, they're not about that magic stuff, but Kairos, they're like, hey, magic's pretty cool. And while Ilana was born to a Kairosian family, she was taken as a child and raised in Erin, so she has like one foot in both sides of this. But then as this book goes on, she starts to develop her own magical abilities, and turns out she is actually very, very powerful. That is another positive point about this book, is the internal struggle within Ilana, because she has reason to sympathize with, and she has reason to doubt, both causes in the external conflict that this book deals with. That and coming to grips with her own power, which is very, like, scary, especially because it turns out she might be some kind of messiah type figure, which is a bit of a weight to drop on someone's shoulders. And also the book starts with her being accused of a crime she didn't commit, and so, like, there's a lot of good stuff with the terror that she feels of, like, suddenly this place that she's known that is safe, that is home to her, is thrown into chaos because like the one person who was sort of her guardian is now gone, and like the other people have quite strong prejudice against her and sort of start turning on her quickly, and so she definitely finds herself trapped between 2 sides. Obviously as the book goes on it becomes clearer, like one side is definitely better than the other, but Callie Bates does a really good job of exploring like the inner struggle of the character of Ilana determining and coming to grips with which side she should be on. So that all makes for a very engaging plot and a really cool character in Ilana herself. Another part of this book that is really well written is the relationship between her and Johan, who is the protagonist for the second book. By the way, disclaimer, I'm not entirely sure if I'm pronouncing all of these names right, the character and place names. I've been on Callie Bates' website and there is like a pronunciation guide for everything in these books, but I can't remember what the pronunciation is supposed to be. But I do also think that there was a bit written there that's like, you know, you can pronounce them however you feel they should be pronounced, so I feel like that's just what I'm gonna do. Anyway, the relationship between Ilana and Johan is really well done. It is really sweet. You really feel the chemistry between those two, and the romance that blossoms between them is really cool to read about. I've not read that many romances in fantasy that I've really grown attached to. Like, sometimes it feels like it's just taking away from like the epic scope of what's going on, and then sometimes it feels like it's just there's a romance tacked on for the sake of there being a romance. However, these two, I was really engaged with their relationship and the way they came to view each other and care for one another. Something that was especially fun for me because I accidentally read these books out of order. I read this one first, so I already knew that Johann was a good guy, we could trust him. But there is like a pretty significant portion in the start of the first book where Ilana meets Johann and is like, I don't know if I can trust this guy, because I had that future knowledge because I read the second book first. I was like, yeah, no, it's Johann, you can trust him, we know him. Well, you don't know him, but I do. The point is, it's a very sweet and compelling relationship and dynamic between the two of them. It's definitely one of the best romantic plot lines that I've read in fantasy, especially when we move into the second book and then we get Johann's perspective on all of it. It's fun to see the other side of how they view each other and how they've both got doubts about like whether the other one likes them as much as they do. It's really cute. Speaking of Johann and the second book, as I mentioned, I accidentally read this one before I read the others, didn't know it was part of a trilogy, just sort of saw the cover, thought that looks cool, and gave it a chance. Good job I did, because I did really enjoy it. Even without having read the first one, this one did like stand on its own as like a really compelling read. I think partially because we get a brand new POV. Speaking of, we get more information about Johann's backstory in this book, and it is a really cool backstory that he has. It explores more of like how he got his magical powers. Oh, I forgot to mention, also another factor in the world building is magical people throughout the continent are persecuted by witch hunters, and Erin and Johann and their friends are all on the side of people with magic, and they're like, hey, stop witch hunting. It's bad. And the witch hunters are like, nah. And so there's that struggle as well, which is really cool and compelling to read. I really enjoyed Johann's backstory. From like the very first page, I was like hooked on this character, and I was like, okay, want to know more about this guy, want to know about his past, about the things he's been through, the things that he's going to do now. Essentially, I'll try and like sum it up in a very non-spoilery way, but basically he and his brothers were experimented on by a witch when they were younger to like give them even higher magical powers than most of the general populace, and those experiments were somewhat unethical, and that woman who did them was not the best kind of person, a pretty shady lady, pretty sus. And also, he runs back into this lady in this book and knows that she has his brothers, and so he wants to rescue his brothers, and that is a very well written part of the book, like the guilt that he feels over the fact that he left his brothers once and feels like he let them down and has to make up for that, and then the suspicion surrounding this lady who is suddenly back in his life. Again, lots of good character work in this book with Johann. Really found myself sympathizing for and rooting for him. Something else I really enjoyed about this book in particular is it explored a lot more of the world than the first and third book do. We go out of Erin and Kairos and we explore more of the overall continent that these books are set in, and it's always fun to see more of the world and more of like the political hierarchy that's going on and different like political spheres that are getting involved in things. I like as well that the world that these books are set in is very like Greek and Mediterranean inspired. Well, actually in the Erin and Kairos have a more sort of Celtic vibe, but then like the wider continent that this takes place on definitely feels like a Mediterranean Greek sort of thing. In fact, if I get the map, I'm pretty sure you could hold a map of the Mediterranean over it and it would line up pretty well. And also there's more exploration in this book generally of how the magic system works, and especially how the witch hunters operate, and there's a subplot involving the witch hunters that I found very compelling and really enjoyed the way that comes to a head in the climax of the book. It's very cool and very satisfying to read. And again, we've got the emotional through liner of Johann's relationship to Ilana and his connection to his brothers, and then this lady who did experiments on him when he was younger. Yeah, great characters, good action, good plot. A good book, essentially. Moving on to the third book now, The Soul of Power. As you might expect from the title, this one also deals a bit more in the way that magic originates and works in this world. And our protagonist in this one is Sophie Dunbarron, who is friends with Ilana and Johann. We've met her in the previous books, but we've not had her POV until now. I was unsure about having Sophie as the POV because I felt like I wasn't too engaged with her character from her previous appearances, but then as this book got into the meat of it, those worries were unfounded. Again, another really cool, engaging character. Again, cool to see her perspective on Ilana and their friendship, because Ilana is so powerful and is almost like a figurehead to the people, whereas Sophie is the one who is in charge, but then for various reasons Ilana is out of the picture in this book, and Sophie has to kind of come to grip with leading on her own without Ilana there. And there's a lot of interesting like internal character stuff about how like she misses Ilana there, but at the same time she feels jealous of Ilana and the fact that she is so powerful and has the love of the people, whereas Sophie feels like that's very much an uphill task that she has to earn their respect and their admiration and their trust. And there's also a lot of good political intrigue that goes on in this book. Sophie finds herself having to rule, but she is very naive and new to the political landscape, and it very much feels like getting thrown into a snake pit of politics, not knowing who to trust or where to turn for advice. Really felt like the anxiety with every decision that she had to make. And also the tension in this book is raised for Sophie specifically because Sophie is pregnant throughout this book. Anytime that she gets in danger, you're like, oh no, she and her kid are in danger. Really felt like the fear that Sophie feels for all of that really made it engaging, made her a very sympathetic character, especially with like the not knowing who to trust part of this book. That is also really well written. So yeah, I definitely really like all three POV characters that we get in this series. I do have to say, I think my favorite character is actually one of the side characters who we don't get a POV from, and it is a character called Rhea Knoll. She was really cool, really enjoyed whenever she showed up, had a lot of good lines, especially in the third book. She becomes a bit more prominent and has a really nice friendship with Sophie. It's really sweet. And also something that I appreciated is coffee exists in this world, and Rhea Knoll has a coffee addiction, which is just like a fun little detail to throw in, especially when it's a fantasy world. It's like, oh yeah, they have coffee there too. It's very similar to Jean's coffee addiction in Republic of Thieves. Both of those characters are like, get me my coffee now, which, you know, mood. I don't know if Callie Bates is planning on continuing writing this series. I'm pretty sure that she's just going to leave it as a trilogy, but if she ever did want to continue this or come back to it, I would love to have a POV book from Rhea's perspective, because there is a lot of interesting stuff with her, and as I said, she was a really cool character. Really enjoyed any time that she was on page. So while my overall opinion of these books is positive, I do have a couple of small criticisms, but they are small. They are fairly minor. One of them is that there are times, especially in the first book, where Ilana's power seems overpowered. Once or twice it feels almost like a get out of jail free card, but then the fact that Ilana is so powerful is the point of Ilana's character. It's what makes her an asset to both sides. It's what makes her the main character of the book. So, like I say, it's a minor criticism. The series name is the Waking Land Trilogy, which I'm not as big a fan of. I prefer when like a trilogy or a series has like its own name independent to the titles of the books within it, whereas this one is just the first book is The Waking Land, so it's The Waking Land Trilogy. I don't know, that's a very surface level criticism, and it's just personal preference on my part, but I prefer it when a series has its own overarching name. As I mentioned, the Memory of Fire explores a lot more of the world, like geographically, and I really enjoyed getting to read about that and exploring more of it. And then the third book goes back to just Eren and Kairos, which feels a little bit like it's shrinking the overall stakes and scope of the story. You know, The Waking Land is like we're just in Eren and Kairos, and then Memory of Fire are like, oh, look at this whole continent, look at all these places, all these different cultures and people, and then Solar Power, we're just back to Eren and Kairos again. But I did really enjoy the Solar Power and the other two books as well, so like I say, those are my criticisms, but they are all fairly minor. I suppose there were certain points where like the characters were doing things and I was like, no, that's the wrong thing to do. But that was more like, that's not a criticism of the book, that's just good characterization, because they all have their reasons for making the decisions that they do, even if they turn out to be the wrong ones or ill-advised ones. So overall, I really enjoyed this series. I thought it was a really fun read. I'd definitely love to go and reread it again and read it in the correct order this time. The characters themselves and the dynamics between them are all really, really well written. One of the strongest parts of this series. It's got a really cool, magical atmosphere, and I highly recommend it because this one is fairly, it's not that well known. It's kind of underrated, or under the radar rather, but I think it deserves its time to shine. I had a really good time with it, and if you haven't read it, thoroughly recommend it. If you have read this series, let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. Do you agree with what I said about it? Do you disagree? If you like this video, please leave it a like. If you want to see more from me, please subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and as always, I will see you in my next one. What a fun time to start drilling.